The safest item in your freezer used to be ice cream, or so we believed. What if I told you, however, that some of the most well-known brands on the market today have been subtly connected to food, hospitalizations, and even fatalities, and yet they're still attractively displayed on your grocery shelf? More than 100,000 ice cream cartons were recalled from American schools and retail establishments in the past 3 months alone because of allergen mislabeling and Listeria plastic fragments. 3 people were even killed by an untastable and odorless pathogen in one batch. And that's all that has been formally documented. Therefore, whether your ice cream is clean is not the question. How many firms are hiding behind nostalgia packaging and false promises is the real question. One scoop at a time, how many of them are taking advantage of your trust? Let's examine each of the 5 names to avoid. We'll show you 2 that are truly safe, so don't worry. First, Bluebell. Not because of a new flavor, Bluebell's making news again. Only a few weeks ago, one of their goods was taken off the shelves due to improper packaging. A container whose label makes no reference to nuts. But before we go right in, if you're worried about your health, click the subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this is where we share the facts that no one talks about. And if you're with me, please let me know. In the comment field, put 1 if you're currently viewing and this video speaks to you. Type 0 otherwise. You are unaware of the significance of your voice. Consider that. A nut-flavored ice cream that was marketed as entirely harmless. There was only a silent recall hidden someplace where no one would notice it. No allergy warning, no obvious label. Furthermore, this is not a one-time error. This concerns the continued omission of a brand with a documented history of lethal contamination from our food chain. How, without any institutional control, Bluebell products are still being supplied to large merchants, public institutions, and assisted living facilities in 2025. Because this is the reality. Brands benefit much from the way food recalls operate in this nation. The majority are voluntary and hardly known. A PDF is silently posted somewhere in the hopes that no one reads it. There is no national notice or big statement at checkout. Therefore, Bluebell is not viewed as a warning sign when it is recognized once more for putting lives at risk through allergy mislabeling. It is handled as though it were a paperwork error. Fix it, go on, and continue selling. However, the consequences are genuine. There is no second chance when it comes to nut allergies. The incorrect product can cause convulsions, respiratory collapse, and even death with just 1 spoonful. However, neither a supply chain freeze nor a brand audit or government probe were prompted by Bluebell's mislabeling. Nothing was triggered. Why? Because Bluebell isn't the only one involved. It concerns a system that ignores the human cost while rewarding compliance on paper. A system in which reputable companies are given second, third, and fourth chances, while the rest of us receive cliched press releases and hollow excuses. Not to mention how these goods are marketed. The logo is all about family memories and gentle hues. The dialect is traditional, farm fresh, and handmade. However, the contents of the box are the consequence of minimum cost ingredients, industrial scale manufacture, and obvious accountability flaws. Therefore, if you're considering adding 1 to your cart this week, consider whether it's worth risking your child's health for a company that consistently gets caught and gets away with it. For this is no longer about ice cream, it concerns how far a business can go before we say enough. Second place, the ice cream of Friendly. For many years, Friendly's had a certain allure, with its pastel packaging and recognizable typefaces, making it seem like a part of American culture. However, in 2025, this is what is obscured by that sentimental picture. Friendly's committed an error that should never occur in any food system that claims to safeguard its customers. They ended up using vanilla bean canisters for their cookies and cream ice cream. It doesn't seem concerning until you see what was absent. Soy was not listed on the label for vanilla beans. One of the most prevalent allergies in the nation, wheat, was not on the list. And suddenly, under the guise of safety, a product that may cause harmful reactions was sitting in freezers in several states. However, the true problem extends well beyond a misprint. It's the ease with which that error reached the shelves. Friendly's did not distribute the batch directly. It went via UNFI, one of the nation's biggest food distributors. Thus, Friendly's is more than just a link in a supply chain. It's a part of a system that is so vast and dispersed that basic safety can be compromised and no one is held accountable. People with allergies are not the only ones at risk from this type of mistake. Everyone who still reads labels, believes in regulations, and feels that someone is looking out for them loses trust as a result. Because everything you believe to be true become a guess the moment a label is false. And Friendly's response, a recall to be sure, but hardly more than a whisper. No public statement, no audacious acknowledgement of fault, and no offer of assistance to those impacted. A few crates were accounted for, a product was discreetly removed, and business as normal resumed. The tone is consistently the same small error, completely confined and unimportant. So let's take a step back. This brand distributes its goods to senior living facilities, hospitals, and school districts via extensive warehouses and hundreds of stores. And we are supposed to assume that only a few hundred containers, a small batch, or a particular lot were impacted when an allergy mislabeling occurs. When responsibility is inconvenient, you get that story. A system that depends on familiarity and low prices to remain relevant lies behind Friendly's smiling logo. However, that doesn't justify a system with little public communication and optional accuracy. This isn't about one mistake. That mistake shows that even in 2025, brands still believe you're not paying attention. Those labels are not protective, they are merely packaging. Even a few silent refunds and technical jargon can conceal an error. Friendly's aspires to be a trustworthy brand. However, the closer you look, the more that trust begins to crumble. And what precisely are you taking home when not even the label can be relied upon? Rich's ice cream comes in at number 3. Don't go to Rich's if you're purchasing ice cream for hospitals, schools, or assisted living facilities. Simply ignore it. You don't want institutional freezers of this brand. It's one of the most obvious instances of how food intended for the most vulnerable can be the least controlled, not because it's costly or difficult to locate. Following a Listeria outbreak that rocked state-run institutions, Rich's ice cream was just taken off the shelves. It was discovered that their ice cream cups, which are frequently used in patient meals and school lunch programs, might be tainted. A recall of more than 100,000 individual units was required. These weren't high-end beers in upscale stores. These were inexpensive, widely available goods that found their way into nutrition programs and public cafeterias. This is the portion that should unnerve anyone. The name Rich's is not well known. It does not need to be. The brand is hidden beneath contracts, supply chains, and levels of red tape in the food service industry. It's not something parents select. It is not requested by patients. However, their meals are still given with a plastic spoon and an acknowledgement of institutional trust. That is the point of danger. Thus, the typical customer won't even be aware of what Rich's is, won't be informed of the recall, won't be aware that they've consumed a recalled item. The system is designed in such a manner, with just enough documentation to deter examination and just enough silence to maintain the flow. Additionally, the brand issued a recall but fell short of being transparent. Not a single national announcement. There is no attempt to explain how a pathogen like Listeria, which can infect elderly people, neonates, and pregnant women and cause death, got into factory-sealed cups that were intended for wide distribution. No reorganization, no accountability to the people. Within the food service business, Rich's remains silent, shielded by the very scale that ought to be controlling them. This brand thrives on being invisible. It is independent of customer loyalty. It depends on contracts, government tenders, and wholesale agreements that prioritize volume and inexpensive cost over facility hygiene or ingredient integrity. Tragically, this type of contamination is not uncommon. It keeps happening. It occurs again because removal becomes logistically challenging and politically inconvenient once a corporation is integrated into public food systems. Therefore, keep in mind that Rich's made it in if you're presuming that the food provided at your child's school or your parent's assisted living facility has been screened, tested, and inspected. They recalled Rich's, it's still Rich's. Additionally, the warning can arrive too late the following time. Remain alert, they are more than just brands. They are systems. Additionally, they cause greater harm the more undetectable they are. 4. Breyers. It's time to look past the front of the carton if you're still going for Breyers because it seems normal. This company has been refining its image of simplicity for years. Soft vanilla, black and white wrapper boasts of real ingredients and fresh cream. However, such terms mean less now than they did in 2025, because one of the most obvious instances of corporate bait and switch in the ice cream aisle lies beneath that tidy appearance. Breyers used to have a limited list of ingredients. They used to be good at that. Just sugar, milk, cream, and perhaps a little vanilla essence. However, their ingredient list grew into the double digits as revenues became more important and formulas subtly changed. In place of actual ice cream, you can now get additives such diglycerides and carrageenan mono, as well as frozen dairy dessert. They can take shortcuts without telling you outright thanks to a legal reclassification. The term frozen dairy dessert is more than merely a semantic one. It indicates that there is not enough real cream in the product for it to be considered ice cream under the law. However, Breyers continues to sell it alongside actual ice cream. They simply allowed the misunderstanding to serve their interests. A whole shelf of customers who believe they are receiving what they always get, silent label updates, and a visual design that remains constant. It's no coincidence. It's a tactic. Breyers is more than simply a brand. It is owned by the international conglomerate Unilever. In a global portfolio, it is a commodity. Formulas also vary when cost reduction is required. Quality suffers when margins decline. The issue is that no one informs the public, even if they are not required by law to. You are left with a container that reads vanilla, yet it contains dairy byproducts, vegetable gums, and thickeners. In low-cost grocery stores, where price frequently takes precedence over transparency, Worst Breyers still holds a large portion of the shelf. Those who are searching for inexpensive sweets that won't ruin their cupboard are the ones who are most impacted. They are being fed a product that no longer embodies the tradition, branding, or trust that it previously commanded. Nevertheless, Breyers prospers. Because when a product is demoted, authorities don't need explicit front label justifications, since wholesalers continue to handle it as if it were premium stock. Because in a sea of garbage, millions of people still believe they are selecting the clean alternative. We learn from Breyers that not every deception is obvious. It can be silent and slow at times. Sometimes it goes unnoticed because of legal loopholes that let companies promise more while delivering less, rather than because of bacteria or recalls. Thus, it's possible that Breyers still looks familiar. However, the contents of that container are now different. Additionally, you're probably not eating what you believe you are if you haven't recently read the fine print. 5th, Turkey Hill. Take a break if you notice Turkey Hill on sale and believe you're getting a good, safe deal. This company is one of those that mainly relies on its homegrown reputation, family farm vibe, and Pennsylvania roots. In 2025, however, the contents of the tub reveal a different picture. Turkey Hill had to recall hundreds of cartons of chocolate marshmallow ice cream just this year. Why? Because the product was found to contain metal shavings. Real metal fragments, not mildew or incorrect labeling, found their way into a frozen treat offered by large national retail chains. It is not a fluke that causes that kind of pollution. It indicates a systemic breakdown in internal monitoring, equipment maintenance, and inspection procedures. However, it isn't until the product has been in thousands of freezers that the public learns about it. However, metal isn't the only topic here. The biggest warning sign for Turkey Hill is how quickly the business has grown without scaling up its quality controls. Turkey Hill has experienced rapid expansion since it was recently purchased by a private equity firm, larger distribution agreements, new flavors, and entry into major grocery chains from coast to coast. The issue is that safety sourcing and transparency sometimes suffer when business margins take precedence. The source of the company's ingredients has become more ambiguous. Many of their purportedly natural goods include inexpensive stabilizers, thickeners, and artificial flavorings that are hardly noticeable. When you combine it with a greater dependence on third-party manufacturers, co-packers, and production under Turkey Hill's brand, you end up with a disjointed supply chain for which no one is really responsible. It is easier to avoid taking responsibility when something goes wrong when there are more people involved. For you, what does that mean? In other words, the tub of ice cream that ends up in your cart may not even originate from a facility in Turkey Hill. It could be produced under a contract that puts volume ahead of safety in a plant 2 states away with equipment that needs repair. Furthermore, nobody is required by law to tell you any of it. Turkey Hill still portrays itself as a brand that is local. In actuality, though, this is now a nostalgic, data-driven, profit-maximizing machine. They profit from the same regulatory loopholes that give industrial food companies legal cover to operate. Therefore, the same brief recall, lack of long-term responsibility, and quick return to market are always the response when anything hazardous, like metal fragments, appears in the product. On the surface, Turkey Hill could appear to be a straightforward brand. However, easy does not equate to secure, and it's time to stop assuming the best when the same container can pose a safety risk in addition to a smile. Take a breath before we continue. Because not every business is betraying your confidence, and not every scoop is a trap. Some names are still true to themselves. They prioritize quality over expediency. And here's one you can reach for without flinching if you've been suspiciously examining your freezer. 1. Tillamook ice cream. Tillamook is unique not only because of the ingredients it utilizes in its ice cream, but also because it doesn't cut corners. One of the few national brands that still functions as a co-op is this one, owned by farmers, located in Oregon, based on a supply chain that they genuinely manage rather than merely renting on paper. No secret facilities then. No factories were outsourced. No covert transfers to shadow producers in 2 different states. Instead of filler, their ingredient list reads like food. Sugar, milk cream, vanilla made with real beans and berries, no sugar with high fructose. Don't use phony thickeners, no ambiguous flavorings concealed by gaps. They utilize more butterfat, which gives it a luscious mouthfeel. Because it isn't diluted with air or gums, the flavor is strong. And that counts, particularly today, that the majority of brands are subtly hiking costs while taking shortcuts. One of the few companies that is open about their sourcing is Tillamook. They disclose the source of their dairy. What they feed their cows is what they tell you. They make investments in sustainability because it's ingrained in their business practices, not because it's trendy. Wall Street is not what they're after. They're not giving investors more margin. They are making an honest effort, and it is evident. Moreover, they have resisted the pressures of the private equity turbulence. The food conglomerates have not absorbed them. To appease stockholders, they haven't slashed operations. That autonomy is uncommon. Additionally, it affects how they react to criticism, how they manage recalls, and how infrequently they are required to do so. Trusting a brand in 2025 entails more than just enjoying the flavor. It entails being aware of the people working behind the scenes, their treatment of employees, the source of their raw materials, and whether they would risk losing money to protect you. Tillamook is not flawless. It's one of the remaining ones that still feels authentic, though, in contrast to the mayhem of corporate ice cream. And that type of clarity is worth clinging to in a noisy freezer. 2. Straus Family Creamery. Straus Family Creamery's greatest victory is straightforward and uncommon. All of their ice cream is certified organic, not exactly organic, not half organic, and not concealed by dubious labels. Complete openness. Complete responsibility. And in a sea of corporate deception, that alone makes them stand out. Straus does the exact opposite in a world where companies hide behind labeling loopholes and stretch meanings. They proudly label. Instead of hormones, their dairy comes from pasture-raised cows. Their cream, which was not created in a lab, is pure and thick. Their sugar is made from organic cane rather than corn syrup, which is concealed from view. The integrity of each ingredient, not its shelf life, is the deciding factor. Because of this, their ice cream doesn't taste mass-produced. It seems sincere. However, this is what really makes them one of the safest options for 2025. Production is not contracted out. Ghost facilities are not operated by them. Their accredited creamery in Northern California is where they make everything. This calls for stricter regulations, greater expectations, and a zero-tolerance policy for shortcuts. And it's painfully obvious how important such control is when you consider recent industry-wide recalls for metal shards, allergen confusion, and Listeria contamination. One of the few companies actively opposing the monopolies that control American cuisine is Straus. They have publicly opposed the use of artificial growth boosters in industrial farming and the erosion of the organic standard due to corporate pressures. They are more than just baselines, they travel farther. There are no trendy claims, just functional methods like regenerative farming, closed-loop systems, and glass packaging that totally eliminates microplastics. Furthermore, it's not a tiny startup with a narrow audience. Straus has matured sensibly rather than carelessly. They are available at Whole Foods, co-ops, and some local supermarkets. Demand came before quality, not because they paid for placement. Additionally, they have opted to remain regional in order to maintain continuity. In contrast to the majority of businesses who pursue national expansion at any costs. It's not common. That's deliberate. Not everyone is a fan of Straus ice cream. It is more expensive. It's more difficult to find. It's real, though. Real is also worth pursuing in 2025. You don't need more taste selections once you've seen how pervasive the dysfunction is in this sector. You must have one reliable brand. Straus may be that person. Just dessert anymore before you go. It has evolved into a trust test. A product that once represented happiness is now concealing dangers behind glossy packaging and corny taglines. How far you're willing to let these firms to push your boundaries is reflected in what you decide to scoop. Don't just follow your cravings when you shop. Keep your eyes open when you shop. Find out the meaning behind the label. Inquire about the quiet. Give your freezer something to be proud of the next time. Because your mental health should never be sacrificed for a sweet reward. Keep the discussions going, and remember to click the bell, like, and subscribe so you don't miss our next in-depth analysis.